from my perspective, I don't really see a coherent vote no movement. There isn't one central thing that I'm hearing workers demanding from Sean O'Brien. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just how I see it.
Appreciate all the chat in the comments. Will, longtime listener, no voter, and certainly understand where he's coming from. Some of the, you know, in his opinion, part-timers didn't get paid enough, overtime protections aren't strong enough, and the progression is too long for regular package car drivers. So, you know, I definitely understand where people are coming from on either side. That you know, I think, you know, the fact of the matter is that it's a better contract than UPS workers have seen in a long time. And the question to the members is it enough? Can you get more? And so that's going to be we're going to get the results of that. We're going to get the results of that question on Tuesday. So here to talk to us about that is Teddy Ostrow. Teddy Ostrow is host of the Upsurge podcast. He is a national freelance labor reporter, in addition to his podcast, The Upsurge, which is about UPS, the Teamsters, and what these contract negotiations mean for the broader labor movement. He also has bylines in These Times, The New Republic, Jacobin, and more. Teddy, welcome back to the program. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me. Always love to talk to y'all.
So, you know, let's go ahead and start off. You know, we've had a few different we've had a few different times talking about, you know, what is in the contract. So if people don't know, they can go back and listen to my conversation with Donnie, our conversation with you a couple of weeks ago, and some further conversations we've had about it. And so let's just go ahead and jump right into the reaction of the membership. How do you feel? What does the pulse feel like to you across the country?
Right. Well, what I'm about to share is kind of a preview, I think, of the next episode of The Upsurge. You know, I've talked to dozens of people around the country, and I've talked to many of those folks who have talked to even more dozens of people around the country. And I think it's important to state, like, this is an enormous union, so it's hard to really get an accurate pulse. Certainly, you can't find that pulse on social media. But I think there's maybe some ordering to the chaos that is the opinions of folks, the complex and, you know, very ranged opinions of folks in this union. So I think there's several layers of the reaction that depends on a couple of things. You know, these are imperfect lines of demarcation, but I think you can look at region, you know, you can look at the classification, what type of job you have, age. And I think maybe one of the more predictive points is whether or not we're talking about an activist layer of the Teamsters union. You know, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of folks out there who are really happy about this contract. And one reason for a lot of those people is just purely the economics. These are big raises compared to past contracts, just in general, hands down. You know, some part-timers will see $9 in raises over the next 5 years, which is pretty significant. And whether that's enough, right? We're gonna see whether people are going to vote on whether that was enough. It may not be enough for some folks. So also second-tier drivers, for example, you know, they'll move into a progression that was up to $32 from now to $49 per hour. So I think there's a lot of folks in this sort of maybe larger camp, whether right or wrong, who are thinking maybe more individualistically or just looking at the economics. Then I think, you know, it's important to mention there are folks that are perhaps a bit more involved in the union on the shop floor. They file grievances. They are more involved in the contract campaign. And many of those folks are looking at this contract too, and they recognize that this is a sea change from previous contracts, that this is clawing back many of the previous concessions that were taken by the union, most notably the two-tier system among delivery drivers in 2018, and that it's a step forward in the union in a better direction. And I think, you know, I think that's pretty undeniable that that's true. At the same time, there are folks, you know, in this same camp who are either activists, more involved, who wish that the union had demanded more. You know, most of the people I've spoken to are relieved that there's no strike as of now. But there are activists who I've also spoken to, and just normal average folks who aren't necessarily that involved, who believe the Teamsters had more leverage and could have won more that was on the table. And in that group, as well as beyond sort of a militant minority, we're seeing, some people who are disappointed with a range of different issues. And that might be part-time pay. It may be that within part-time pay, there's now a new established tier. It might be about market rate adjustments, right? Whether or not those are going to be held and or taken away. And it may be also, protections from harassment, violation of overtime protections as well, whether or not all that stuff is strong enough to protect people, because those are serious issues too. And I have to say, I'm sort of amazed at the range of responses I've gotten over the past couple of weeks when I asked people, what would you have wanted more, or what do you like? It's really a range. And I think, like, if there's any order to this madness, I think, like, I do see a lot of younger folks who sort of sunk their teeth into the contract campaign, like, saw the power they had when they were doing practice pickets. They're suffering at this job, whether because they're in the back of a package truck and it's 140 degrees right now in the South, in the back of the package truck, or, they're dealing with poverty because we're dealing with poverty wages among part-timers, and they expected more. They simply had raised expectations. And I think also a really important thing to note is that there was among some folks a desire for revenge, in some cases for what the company did to people over the pandemic, how horrible the company treated people. And this has been said before. I interviewed Greg Kerwood for the next episode of The Upsurge. I've also talked about this with Richard Hooker Jr. Out of 623, but that sort of revenge and that desire to right the wrongs of the pandemic isn't necessarily something that could be translated easily into a collective bargaining agreement. It may have to be worked out in the streets. It may have to be worked out over several CBAs or in a larger movement against corporate greed. So I would say, from a range of opinions, there are certainly splits in certain hubs. There are other regional differences depending on the supplement. But overall, a lot of people love this agreement. And I think some people there are others who are conflicted. And whether or not that will translate to a no vote or a yes vote, we'll have to wait and see on August 22nd.
In an article that came out recently in Labor Notes, they quoted Greg Kerwood, who said, if we had gone on, quote, if we had gone on strike for 5 days and came back with this contract, I think people would feel very different about it, even if it was exactly the same. Not striking changes the pronouns from we as a union to you as a leadership. We did this. We fought for it. We won. And I think that gets to what you were talking about. He and Richard Hooker's quoted in this article as well, talking about, some people, they really just wanted to, just fight with UPS, right? And it is difficult to kind of to channel those emotions into a contract, into a financial kind of compensation, when, a lot of it is like, you really want to kind of stick it to the man.
I think there's like so much. I felt it, and I'm not even a UPS worker. Right. From the beginning, I'm a reporter, and I would never tell anyone to vote no or vote yes, and I would never, say to anyone, I would never ask of anyone to just strike, because it's not my decision. It's not my risk. But for the love of God, it would have been incredible, and it's still possible. If there was this strike at this moment, when there was, when we're seeing already, about the size of the UPS bargaining unit, that number of people have already struck this year and are still on strike. And it's only, I have never been on strike, but it's something I've read. It's something I've heard from people. It changes you, and it shows you the power that you have. And, it really highlights the class war that people are in this country. And it's not, at the end of the day, sometimes it's not about the contract. It is, you want to make gains, which the UPSers already have. They fought hard and they won already. Was it enough? that question necessarily isn't about the language in the contract, but it's about the organization of people and whether or not, you're moving forward on that front in the larger sort of question of workers versus corporations, workers, labor versus capital.
Right. And
well, Jacob, I just wanted to chime in here on that point because, something that is really important to me to get across is that I want to encourage everyone to participate and everyone to cast their vote for various reasons. But part of it is no matter what happens, y'all will need to be stronger on the other side of this, whether it's enforcing a contract, whether it is going on strike, whatever the situation may be. You'll need more solidarity. You'll need more power in the workplace. And so that's why I would really encourage everyone, regardless of whether you're a yes vote or a no vote, cast your vote and use your voice. You've got both and you should use both. And you should talk with your coworkers and listen to your coworkers and get organized with your coworkers and fight the boss in the workplace. And so I just wanted to encourage folks with that message. I think that really kind of lined up with what you're saying here because there are broader issues, in this context here. It is about this contract, and it's also about our society and our economy and our class war that we're all part of. So, there is a lot going on, but just wanted to chime in with that.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, well, and the that's definitely really important, and the the ability to vote, like I was talking to Donnie about, is pretty unique in among the working class in the United States. You don't often get that. And what Greg Kerwood was talking about when he was quoted in that Labor Notes article, I think that's one of the reasons why it's important for us, as media and also for the Teamsters to stress that, especially if there isn't a strike, especially if this tentative agreement is ratified, it's crucial that the members know that they are what won this tentative agreement. It wasn't just that Sean O'Brien is so charismatic and such a tough negotiator. It's because there was a real credible strike threat that UPS was scared of. And so even if you didn't get to go out and feel like you're fighting on the streets or whatever, the risk of that, the real credible threat of that, and the real actual, kind of metaphorical fighting that happened with the practice pickets, that won all of these things that are improvements, are just factually improvements. Like you said, and like I've said, the question is it enough? But these are improvements, and they weren't won by Sean O'Brien.
And to that point, a lot of, as I said, I think a lot of the folks who may have been disappointed are probably in sort of a militant minority in the Teamsters Union who were activists and were leaders. And the thing about disappointment is there's a fine line to what that leads to of cynicism and hope, right? And if it can be translated into hope, which is necessary to enforce this contract, which is certainly, some of the things that were won, that's going to have to be dealt with on the shop floor by enforcement. And it may even get into arbitration. It may, be enforced in certain areas and not others. Like, when I talked about the reaction of different people and I mentioned different regions, it's because different regions have different levels of shop floor militancy. And the next steps are to make sure that this union, right, that the militant minority can grow, and also from, one coast to the other, build shop floor militancy, which also translates into demanding more among a broader group of people for the next contract and beyond. So I think it's important that cynicism is sort of pushed to the wayside if, this isn't voted down and Sean O'Brien goes back to the table and doesn't get more, or there's a strike, whatever happens, the UPS Teamsters clearly already won. And if they won enough, we'll know on August 22nd. I mean, on strictly moral terms, clearly not enough. You know, the working class deserves the world. They create all wealth, but that's why they have these democratic processes.
Yeah. And you know, you talked to me about being able to spend several days with a local Teamsters union and being able to be in a meeting where they were discussing the contract and things like this. And, you know, you talked about how varied the responses that you've received are. And that's where I'm at as well. And how different people's motivations are. I told you that I spoke to a UPS driver that I just met randomly. So, you know, not a listener of the show, not somebody that I met through my union work. I happened to be out and he was delivering a package to the building that I was in. And so I said, hey, you know, what do you think about this? And he was like, yeah, I voted no because I think that part-timers got too much and drivers didn't get enough. Right. You know, it's like, that's so bizarre. But so can you talk to us about your experience spending those several days with that local of the Teamsters Union?
Right. This is a relatively small local of the Teamsters Union, Local 251 in Rhode Island. They have 1,200 UPS workers at a single UPS facility in Warwick. And I have to say, you know, it was a really nice time just to like hang out with a bunch of different folks, a bunch of different classifications of varying seniority. And it was an overwhelmingly positive response to the TA, I have to say. And I definitely got where there were tensions wasn't necessarily where there were tensions in other places when I've talked to other folks. Everyone is pretty happy. Like the part-timers I spoke to were super happy about the, you know, wage increase. Maybe that's because they didn't have as high of an MRA, a market rate adjustment, those raises that UPS gives out to certain regions where they have to compete in the labor market. So, you know, certainly the 22.4, the second tier driver being abolished and converted into RPCDs, regular package car drivers, that was a huge point. I spoke to older folks who are really happy to be getting another week of vacation because they're 35 years in. You know, the two things that came up, I think the most was the progression that people wanted, you know, to get to top rate, not in 4 years, but in 2. And then the other thing, which is interesting, was you know, I was talking to 24-year-old, a 32-year-old, some young folks who were talking about their pension not being enough. They're already thinking about retirement, you know, and so, which is not something, you know, I'm in that age range and I don't have a pension. So maybe that's why I'm not thinking about it, but it's just interesting, you know, it's just people think about, I just found an overwhelmingly positive sort of response and a very broad range of individuals and who are thinking both individualistically, but also for the greater good. And people are proud of this TA. When I was in that meeting, I went to a contract review meeting. There were some questions, you know, that was meant to answer questions for people. And I will say, there were surprisingly few questions. Maybe that's because Local 251, they do an incredibly good job, as far as I can tell, in educating the membership, going to the gates and passing out the changes, doing stuff online. There were very few questions. And this contract review meeting felt far more like a celebration than, you know, there were claps and cheers at each enumerated win and some clarifications. And, you know, there was even a laugh at one point because they talked about one of the failures of the negotiations is drivers are made to purchase their own UPS branded socks, which they're required to wear if they wear shorts in the summer. You need to have your brown UPS branded socks, and UPSers wanted UPS to pay for it. And they didn't make progress on that, you know, and so everyone laughed. And I will say it was a really interesting experience, but that wasn't necessarily indicative of everyone I heard across the country.
Interesting. All right. So, Teddy Ostrow, final answer on, and you're going to be held accountable for this. How are the Teamsters going to vote?
This is a dangerous game, but I like my Southern labor friends. Yeah, if I were to make a guess, I think this tentative agreement is likely to pass. But, you know, the union isn't as divided as it was in 2018. You have, you know, back then you had major locals openly pushing a vote no. Now there's near unanimity around supporting this contract. So locals for sure are like whipping yes votes for definitely. And there isn't, you know, from my perspective, I don't really see a coherent like vote no movement. And that may get people angry at me, but you know, there isn't one central thing that I'm hearing workers demanding from Sean O'Brien or the National Negotiating Committee to go back to the table and solve. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, you know, but that's just how I see. Like there isn't a coherent movement that I see that is organized to push against institutional support for this contract. And that's just like, you know, that's just my analysis. And because of that, I see this TA likely pushing through on August 22nd.
Teddy Ostrow, really appreciate it. And your podcast is not going to be ending on the 22nd, right? Y'all have some stuff in store for whether the tentative agreement is ratified or not, right?
Yep. We'll continue the UPS story as long as it goes, and it's going to go for a long time, I'm sure. But, you know, for now, or then the next month or so, I think it was the first time I'm saying this publicly, but we are going to be doing somewhat of a transition to start focusing on. We won't abandon the Teamsters completely, but to focus on what's going on at the UAW, which is hugely exciting. Okay. So I'm already speaking to some folks around the country there, and you'll be hearing from some practice pickets, rallies, and from workers, of course, on the Upsurge podcast pretty soon.
All right, there we go. Well, Adam, this is why we need a soundboard. We could have hit like a breaking news button.
Right. I know.
You heard it first on the Valley Labor Report.
Really? Yeah, really missed opportunity. No, it's not the first on the Valley. We have broken news on the Valley. Come on now.
No. But my news.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Your news. Okay, there you go.
Don't be so defensive, Jacob.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, you guys are not. You guys do the good work. You break the news. You break down the news. All of it. Appreciate it.
Well,
hell yeah.
There you go.
Thanks Teddy.
All right, brother.
Appreciate you, man.
We'll talk soon.
Guys.
All right, that was Teddy Ostrow. Definitely check out his podcast, The Upsurge, wherever you get your podcasts. It's really great. They have gone into a lot of, you know, obviously they've gone into the contract negotiations, how the preparations went, talked about practice picketing, but they also really dive deep into some history of the Teamsters at UPS. So it is a very, very educational, and I think it's going to be an evergreen kind of podcast. It's going to be one of those that you can go back and listen to whenever, like the, like Blowback. Blowback is a fantastic podcast, and they've got a few seasons about, Iraq and Cuba, and it's always you can listen to that anytime. And I think that the Upsurge is going to be one of those that's going to be a good historical, a good resource for people in the future when they want to learn about what happened in 2023. They're going to go and listen to the Upsurge. So
yeah, absolutely. And again, I just want to take this opportunity to remind all folks: if you are a UPS Teamster, please vote. Please let your voice and your vote be heard. Please be counted. It's very important that you participate. So really, I appreciate all of y'all, whether you are voting yes or voting no. Please know that we have nothing but love and solidarity and best wishes for y'all, and we'll be standing beside you. But whatever happens, we got your back, and just wishing all the best for the workers, because as Teddy mentioned, I mean, if we're being honest, no contract is ever really good enough, because labor is where the wealth comes from. These billions in profits would not exist were it not for the workers. But it's just a decision that we all have to make. And so, again, love and solidarity to all the Teamsters.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.